we have lined them up in order of their work as well. So Stuart's on the end, Hannah is there, this is Gabriella, and this is Kathleen. And another interesting thing, each of you work in uniquely different mediums. And I think that kind of can play into the message you're sending as well. But I also like to remind people, a lot of people think abstract art, oh, anybody can do that, you're just throwing paint. You know, we all know Jackson Pollock, but there is a strategy to it, and there is a technique, and many artists that I've known throughout the years, you didn't like the realism stuff because it didn't speak to you because your brain works different, but many of our abstract artists are classically trained, just as we heard at the beginning. So they understand composition, color, form, that sort of thing. So maybe we can expand some. Again, Stuart, starting with you, a little bit about your medium. And you do your representational, but it's really abstract representational. After we finish, we'll tell you where everybody is, but even your figurative work has abstract qualities. You can see the figures within there, but the abstraction is there. So just sort of speak to that a bit.
Sure. So I think one of the best lines in the history of art is when they asked Jackson Pollock why he doesn't paint from nature, and he said, "I am nature." And to me, coming out of that classical background, I was always kind of a little bit pompous about thinking that modern art was kind of silly. And when I first began to experiment with it, it was kind of like riding a bull. Like suddenly you had nothing to hold on to for your rational mind. Like usually if you're painting a tree, you know you got to put the leaves on. A person needs ears, eyes, and nose, whatnot. But with the abstract painting, you still have to come to that peace with the work at the end, and yet you're sort of doing it just through instinct, and at the same time you're sort of following all of the same principles and elements that we're taught in any style of art. So we kind of work with the basic elements of balance and warm and cool and light and dark and tonal structure, the depth and on down the line. But getting back to my particular medium here, I've also been interested in sort of pushing the envelope with different materials and embracing contemporary technology. So this piece here is on a medium that's sort of taken over my repertoire in the last 15 years. It's actually on a clear acrylic panel, and I'm painting on the two sides here. So I don't let other people beat on them, but you can see that it's actually a hard, clear acrylic surface, and I'm painting on the two sides. So when you come close, you can see that there's a sort of automatic depth and luminosity to the surface, and that has really kind of continued to sort of push me to find new territory and new ideas over the years. And then they're presented on a brushed aluminum panel there that sort of embraces the raw materials that we see so much here in the valley. And yeah, I had also not really been a Pollock fan, but when I ended up at one of his shows in New York one year, it was almost like walking into a nuclear physics laboratory. Like the amount of sort of pulsating energy that he was wrestling with was just pretty exotic as you walked through the exhibit. And at the end of the day, you know, we kind of are really trying to put forth a mood or an energy that people react to, and I find it interesting asking people's responses to the work, because I find that women are much more comfortable telling their feelings than men, and that's kind of a big part of the response that tends to be solicited with abstract painting. But it does sort of offer that kind of infinite window that people, you know, I've heard already just a multitude of impressions from just this particular piece, and maybe later we'll call on you to give your impressions from some of these pieces here today.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, when I first started experimenting with abstract art, I was, you know, I went to school for fine art, and you learn a little bit here and there about fine art and the famous fine artists that do abstract work. But when I started experimenting with abstract, I originally thought, oh, I thought like everybody else. Like, I'm just gonna throw some things here, I'm gonna throw some things there, I'm gonna let it dry, and I'm gonna do it again, and it's gonna be perfect. And so I started doing that. And every time I turned around, I was like, oh, that looks like mud. No, it's not working for me. And I was like, oh, and then I started realizing and gaining an incredible respect for how much thought and how much talent goes into really creating an abstract art, because it really has to come from within. It's not like you're looking at something and you can copy it and you can say, oh, okay, I'm going to create the depth of the face or this plant or whatever it is. It has to come from within. And I think one of the most important parts of abstract art is depth, dimension, and also to have a beautiful focal point that enables the viewer to be able to start somewhere and then expand. And so my medium is resin and mixed media on birchwood. I do a layering process, about 5 layers of resin per piece, hand carving and hand painting in between, which enables me to get that depth and that focus in each piece as well.
I have a question. So how do you help draw the person's eye?
How do you help draw the person's eye to the focal point that you talked about? Is that through color? Is that through composition? Because I look at your pieces and there's lots of things to look at, but my eye always lands, I think, right where you want it to.
Yeah. So that's a really good question. So for me, when I'm creating a focal point, I'm normally using some sort of a texture, some sort of a cluster of colors that's just really going to punch out at you. And generally, I want it to be somewhere in the center, because when people look at a piece of artwork, it's not necessarily natural for them to look at the left corner first. They want to look at something, so it's got to be somewhere in the focus of the center, and then that way it is a lot easier for people to be able to expand their eye out and see the detail. And that's generally how I use my process and create focus in my work.
So my medium is encaustic, which is beeswax and pigment. Like I said before, I'm trying to portray something that's deep within me. I kind of have a peculiarity of feeling like this world and the inner world have a very thin wall between them that's very transparent. So for me, I feel like I have this sort of big secret, and sometimes that secret's kind of lonely, and so artwork is my way of sharing it with you, to draw you into a conversation or to express the ethereal. So I work in beeswax pigment, and it's dreamy, and it gives depth to the piece, and there's a loss of control. I'm working with the beeswax at 350 degrees, fully molten. It's dragging and blurring and moving pigment around. It has a life of its own. If I pour a little bit and then I pour a little bit more, automatically those two things are at different temperatures. So it leaves a sculptural element on top of my work that enhances the color and the feeling and gives it more vibration and more movement, and certainly fogginess and a depth. I just think it speaks of my personal, authentic voice and what it is I'm trying to portray. I do have 2 kind of bodies of work that show the same idea. The other one is more landscape-oriented, but it's still, for me, the inner landscape. And in both cases, I'm trying to softly, visually, and viscerally open a door into the unconscious. There's a theory that after World War II, when the world was in angst about our survival as a human race, that was the point at which we all began to see flying saucers. And I feel like the reason we saw those is because the circle is the symbol for wholeness and for the soul. And so our unconscious were spontaneously creating symbols that would bring about healing. So for me, my work comes out of dreams and visions and ideas. I mean, quite often I am doodling, and then 2 days later I'll look back at a doodle and go, oh wow, that needs to be a big painting, and it's this happy accident, but it's also my unconscious telling me the story of my own life sort of ahead of time, and eventually, after many years and much work, it starts to tell me a story that's pretty profoundly taking me deeper every day. So, I mean, that might be it for this thing. Okay.
Thank you.
So I work on panel, and I do multiple layers of cement mixed media. And I love texture, always have. And I didn't initially start out painting with cement, but I was a mixed media. I've always been a mixed media artist, and I've always experimented with acrylics, oils. I've tried just about everything. And nothing seemed to quite keep me interested. Nothing seemed to keep me really interested. I just was looking for that something that really speaks to me, and I think partly because I was so familiar with building supplies and construction stuff, just because I had to know because of my job. I worked with, stucco guys, and I would be the one that say, okay, put a little bit of more powdered pigment to make this color. So I really knew materials, and there was just something that I just needed, that texture. And you can buy those molding pastes and all these different things, but nothing satisfied me. I wanted this look of concrete. I love concrete. I love anything to do with concrete houses, countertops. I just wanted this industrial feel, but yet I didn't want to make it look like concrete. I wanted it to feel more painterly. So I started experimenting and making my own mixes with cement, and after about 3 months, I'm like, I'm done. This is my deal. So this is 10 years. I've been doing this for 10 years now, and I don't think I'll ever change because there is so much to do and express myself, and every year I come up with new ideas because cement is very porous. And you can make really unusual markings on it, like as drawing and painting, but you can also build it up. So I always start with a base of cement. It's a smooth base that I build upon, and then I decide if I'm going to keep it smooth or make it more textured and keep layering out things.
And the cool thing is you can put it outside.
Yes, so I do have 2 bodies of work. These pieces are on wood, so these are what I call my gallery series, because they're what I show in galleries in Celebration. And then I also have, if you look outside, there's that wall outside. Those are all outdoor works, and they all have steel frames. They're done on a cement board, like the hardy board you put in your shower, so it won't warp. And it's all done with concrete stains and concrete sealers. So it really, really holds up in Arizona, winter, rain, whatever weather.
Arizona sun tested. Wow. Hello. I got it working. We've had, how long ago did I get that one from you? 6 years ago? 5 years ago. So we've had one of Kathleen's hanging right to the left of our front door, which gets super intense sun because we face west, and it still looks fresh as the day we bought it. So it makes me smile every time I come through that front gate. So I want to stick with you, and then we can go backwards, but shape is constant, especially you two. Shape is very important in your compositions and what you do. On the other side there, we're a little bit looser, not quite so much distinctive shape, but one thing that I always like to remind people, my friend Ned and Carol came today and said, we're not particularly fans of abstract, but we thought we'd come today to learn about it, and I love that because we love to kind of open people's minds to, you don't have to have only one kind of art in your collection, And, you know, probably part of it being the nature of our business, my husband and I have a wide variety of styles of art in our collection, and most of the artists do. And you can put them all in the same room just by using some good, having somebody like Kathleen help you, or just kind of looking at composition and putting the room together. But we have all of it in the same area. And for me, abstract work is very calming. It invites me to kind of create my story or to go down the path. So instead of looking at something and saying, oh, that artist wanted me to see a tree, the abstract work allows you to kind of settle into your own mind, and again, it's very calming. Now, some can be very, what would you say, very challenging to your brain, but a lot of it is very, very calming. So, but shape is super important here, and I think when we switch back over to the other side, maybe, and you guys can speak to it too, color and how transcending color is. And I know you have one color in particular that you do not like, that you can talk about. So we'll start with you, Kathleen. And hold that microphone close so they can hear.
Well, I actually particularly like all colors, but there's one color that doesn't like me. And that's fuchsia. Like that color right there. Now, I love to wear it. I try to paint with it, and it fails. I can never get the color to work with my paintings. I don't know why, but one of these days I'm going to beat it.
Love the challenge.
Yes. But you know, there's an interesting, I used to teach a lot in color, and one of the interesting things I did with, just to express like how color can really change a mood, is a little study that I did. So I took an abstract work, and I had the students like paint the same subject using 3 different colors, right? So the original painting was actually a Nicholas de Stael painting, and I just had them sketch out that painting because it was just shapes. And then each one had to take 3 colors, just use 3 colors and shades of it, and paint it. And when we got done, we actually showed it to everyone, and we had to describe the feelings. Because every painting, though, even it was the same subject and shape, it all had a different feeling. And that's really important to when you're designing a painting. You know, I usually never fully plan out a painting, but this one in particular, just came up with this kind of model coloration. I didn't really know. I always name my paintings later. Well, to me, when I got done with it, it felt like hydrangeas. You know, like those periwinkle hydrangeas. I thought, well, I don't know that I want that on the whole piece, and so that's at the end. I just added that extra texture to just give you a little resting area and texture. So, although I am very processed in how I think about my start of a painting, I really never really plan it out fully. And color really directs me. I usually always start with an idea of color. I have usually 2 colors in mind when I start, and then I just let it kind of unfold.
What was the question?
I see a lot of shades and form in your.
One of the things that I like about abstract work is when I'm viewing it, is that it does challenge my mind, and it activates my imagination in a way that other work doesn't quite do, because my mind is sort of free to imagine anything that I want from what I'm seeing, and to have a reaction to the colors, the shapes, the balance of the piece, and to really feel it. And so I find my mind wandering and imagining things, and then all of a sudden I'm telling myself a story. When I paint, I try and give a certain tension to the piece by balancing balancing the colors. Like for instance, the orange and the yellow really forms a tension between that space and the blue and the green on this side, which I really enjoy, how it moves your eye back and forth and gives you this sort of playful place to explore inside the painting. The balance of where things are. Now the fake black shapes are done with permanent black ink sort of first, and they're kind of one go. You sort of can't make a mistake on them, but you have a freedom of like a Japanese calligraphy almost, or almost what a graffiti artist I imagine would get the feel of. For me, that brings a certain excitement to the piece, but really I don't know the name of it either until I'm kind of done and I can sort of reflect on it and see what it makes me feel. So it's an exploration of my feeling in and of itself to paint the painting and then to see where I land or where I end up. Yeah, that might be it. Okay. So for abstract art that has a little bit more fluid movement, fluid colors, doesn't necessarily have so much shape sometimes, I think it's fascinating because when you think about emotion, generally your emotion's coming from some sort of information that you're gaining from your environment, and normally it's maybe an experience you're having, or a thought, or something that you're seeing. But the fascinating thing about abstract art that doesn't really have so much a form, but just more movement, in my opinion, is that you're not really relying on a concrete idea, but that emotion still comes in. So then it kind of makes you a bit introspective and saying, well, how can that be? Why is this making me feel that way? And so they're great conversational pieces in that way. And I also love the way that the organic movement just kind of travels and flows, and you can manipulate it in so many different ways to get really unique effects, and it can be very soothing as well. So it's just constantly learning and innovating, and I think it's wonderful, and it's part of what I love with what I do.
So, in terms of my approach with abstract painting, I also treat it more kind of like a Zen painting process, where I might do 50 pieces and only 5 of them I'll keep, because I like to kind of work very viscerally and gesturally. I actually put large 4 to 8 inch brushes on bamboo poles and paint on the floor of the studio, very wet, and let them pool and sort of capitalize on aqueous effects, which is something that you see in Hannah's work, and a lot of artists today, are sort of exploring effects that weren't really available for artists from previous centuries. And I'll actually work on the floor of the studio with these large brushes, so it's kind of like Greco-Roman wrestling. And if I did that here, you'd all be covered with paint. So I do that part of the process back home. And
Thank you.
I thought I was done. But in terms of color, the Impressionists were very much exploring like the opposites of color. What's the opposite of green? Anybody?
Red.
Red. Blue?
Yeah.
Red.
Orange.
Orange. But I also like to think of abstract painting more like chords of color. Like, in fact, it really reminds me of music a great deal, because music, when you think about it, is just the same kind of, you have the bass, the harmonies, the melodies, the rhythms, and those are the types of things that we're really exploring in abstract painting. When I first began my foray in the abstract, it was many years back, and one of my assistants happened to give me an enormous amount of clear acrylic panels that were about this big, and I kind of embarked on a series of diptychs. And just one more interesting story, I had a client in Chicago one year, and they had collected my work, and they were interested in one of these abstract diptychs, and the wife couldn't quite wrap her mind around how to hang the diptych. And so finally I said, well, do you guys sleep in a king bed or a queen? And they said a king. And I said, well, do you sleep, like this with right next to each other, or is there a space in between? And the guy said, there's a space, but there's a German Shepherd in it. But yeah, I think I'm done too. Yeah, they left the German Shepherd on the floor, and it was one and done. So, yeah.
How do we follow that? That does bring up a good point, though, because several of you work in modulars. You also work, like Hannah's got some new pieces that are long, linear pieces. We've got the diptychs and triptychs, and maybe not everybody knows what that is, but you might want to share a little bit about that. And modulars are super cool because you can mix and match and create your own little work of art within the artist's works of art. So what do you guys like about the modulars? And also, Gabby, can you share the story? You were talking about emotion. So it's not a definitive thing, but Gabby came up to me one day and said she walked into her studio and you had that beautiful red piece and a woman was crying. And she's like,
Okay, so I have a painting that's one of my landscapes, but it has an awful lot of feeling in it for me. So I am on a spiritual journey. I follow my dreams, and I try to live sort of a vertical life in which I'm getting deeper rather than just moving horizontally and staying the same forever. I'm willing to look at my own problems or my own tendencies and work with that to free myself of neuroses and worrying and all those things. And so I painted this painting which had kind of all of that in it. It had the passion and the pain of being willing to live in my feelings to find the answers. It had the path. It had sort of my landscapes are big open skies, which are kind of speak of the indomitable nature of the soul. And then on top of that, I put a geometric structure which sort of talks about your mind or the intellect and how that lets you define the experience of the spiritual, because our brains help us understand it, which furthers the process to get deeper and get closer, for me, to the divine. And it's all in the painting, and I felt very nervous about it because quite often people would come up to it and love it but feel a certain amount of angst, because it is a turbulent sky and it isn't necessarily the happiest painting. It's more of a really passionate painting. But then when I came around the corner and the woman was crying, I felt like it was worth everything, because I had really, like I talked earlier and said that my peculiarity is to have this sort of secret of thinking, wow, there's this other world that's inside us that's just as important as the world outside. And she got it. She got my secret. I didn't even have to say anything. She was just already kind of experiencing it by standing there, and I felt so grateful to have given myself permission to paint that painting, and so grateful that she got it. It was like a conversation between her and I without me having to say anything, which is kind of my goal. It's what I hope for.
not that we want to make everybody cry, but you got the emotion.
Can I add a story? Of course, please. So this was early in my painting career, and I was experimenting with a lot of really moody paintings, very grays and browns and blacks and a little color. But it was a really powerful piece when I finished. I knew that there was something to it. Being very naive and really not knowing and learning, I had two paintings. One was very moody with no color, and then the other one was very happy painting, per se, with lots of color. And this guy came in and he says, I really like both these paintings, but I'm drawn to this more dark one, and let me think about it. So he came back the next day and he said, this one, it's kind of depressing, but I like it. And he goes, so I have an inkling to really buy the happy painting. But I really think what I really like is this, he called it the depressing painting. and all I said to him, I said, look, we all have different emotions. Sometimes we're sad, sometimes we're happy. And you know, sometimes we need those moody paintings as well as the happy painting. And he bought the depressing painting.
I think that's a really valid commentary, though. So, are you guys learning about abstract art? Do you like it? All right. We always like to have people who are enjoying the program share their questions, because sometimes because we're all here all the time, we might forget that there's things that you would like to know about that we take for granted. So, and shout out to my Iowa people who came straight here. I know you're tired, but we're glad you're here. Yay! Yes, please.
This one is like our fourth session here. This is very different than the other ones, you can see. You're talking about emotion, you're talking about an inner kind of spirit or an inner kind of action with yourself. You call it emotions. I wonder, as you were speaking, have you ever been reading a book or watching a TV or going up on a mountain and sitting up there seeing a sunset, or is there something that's kind of snapped you into, oh, I want to paint this, or I mean, is there any source or an event or more of a source? Do you get this feelings from watching the TV news, CNN? Or, I mean,
Yeah.
what I'm saying is, how much does an external environment or an external event kind of spark you into
Let me answer it.
creating what
Repeat
you-
it. Okay, that was a beautifully asked question. Beautiful, and I'm not going to be able to paraphrase it quite as well, but for the Facebook people, or if you didn't hear it, it's what inspires you, what events make you, does an event make something click that makes you want to translate it onto, your art form? Is that a good paraphrasing? You said it much better, but good question.
You know, I can just tell you one thing. I think that for me, and I think for a lot of artists, your paintings are kind of a story of your life, and it's all about kind of what you experienced as a child, little memories that you have, and you don't sometimes think about really what goes into your paintings because it's all within you, and it just quietly comes out when you paint. And sometimes, sometimes you really, there are little things that I can think about as a child, but I don't really necessarily, like, things don't trigger, like when for me, this is just personally me, I don't really think about my art that way. Like, I don't get triggered by like certain, say watching TV or sunset or something like that. That's not really how I process it. It's more ingrained. It's more within me. Like, for example, when I was younger, I was obsessed. I lived on Lake Superior in Duluth, and I was obsessed with agates. I'd pick agates all day long. My mom let me, I'd be there from 8 a.m. until 10 p.m. at night. And it was all about the beautiful coloring, the feel, the polish, the shape, the line. And so I think it's more just about, as you grow and you understand yourself better, you are able to express it more in your painting.
So, I feel a lot of what moves me are dreams and visions, but also it's like a spontaneous occurrence within me. Sometimes the painting happens and then I have the feeling, or the feeling happens and it makes me paint a certain way. But I do have kind of a theory about it. I feel that, when modern art came about and abstraction started to happen in society, Nietzsche said that it meant that God was dead. And then Jung sort of retracted that and started to talk about the mythology of man, and how as religion maybe becomes harder to grasp or more of a word than a vision, and the sacred part of man becomes repressed because we love technology and we love our minds and our intellect and reason. Modern art, I think, gives a place for artists who are the keeper of the symbols, really. We play with shape. We come as children and we channel the unconscious onto a page, and in some ways I think that we're creating a mythology that is new, that actually has the capacity to incorporate the evolution of man's consciousness, because it will evolve as we all evolve. So the more we play, the more we reflect what's going on in the world, whether it's speaking to you unconsciously or consciously. You know, in a way, we're challenging the viewer to really churn their heart and look what's in there and see something new every time they look at our work.
So in terms of inspiration, I was really glad to be invited to this show some years back, because I've always loved that idea of painting or art as celebrating life. And there's certainly a place for the blues in so many forms of music or art or what have you, but I've always felt like it's kind of our job to bring that kind of joy and celebration of life to the homes that we're fortunate to connect with our collectors here. And when we look around at sort of the infinite variety of life that has unfolded here on this earth, abstract painting in a way is kind of this kind of new direction of freedom that we see in so many different fields and traditions today. One more story that sort of goes back to like the old Indian lands that we're involved with out here that I've always loved, was sort of speaking to the sacred power of just the simple conversations of symbols and colors and art that the American Indian tradition shared when they had their sand painting rituals. And they had an exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and they have this certain tradition that they would always just kind of come right to the edge of a painting and then step away. And it's kind of this humility that they shared with their kind of respect for the work. And somehow the curator at the moment leaned over to the head chief and he said, we have New York Times, we have 5 million people that are going to attend this exhibit, so much press, do you think you could just finish this piece? And the chief looked back at him and said, if we finish this piece, every woman in Manhattan will wake up pregnant tomorrow. Just to speak to the kind of power that has always been part of this treasured tradition that so many of us here are fortunate to be involved in. And like I said, we sort of tip our hats to the collectors that make that all possible for us.
We always have a comedian on every panel. You're good.
And so I was listening to what you were saying when you were talking about things day to day, whether it be a sunset or climbing a mountain or just something in the present moment. And for me, I get a lot of my inspiration from nature and natural phenomena, and I think I really do get taken back by beautiful sunsets and beautiful mountains and things like that, but not necessarily in the sense where I'm looking at a figure, a mountain, a cactus, a place, a building. Not necessarily more of that. It's more about the color that's involved, the color that is very striking to me, and I'll get a lot of my inspiration from that, and I love to utilize that in my work. And I also think it's important to kind of have your inspiration come serendipitously day to day, because it forces you to be in the present moment at all times. And a lot of us, we're not in the present moment. We're either thinking about the past or we're thinking about the future, and the only time we have is now when we miss the whole thing. And so it really does keep you grounded, and I think part of that grounding experience is one of the most beautiful artistic experiences in itself.
Well said, Hannah. Good. And thank you for that question. Yes, Ned.
I'll have to admit, I'm the person who said I underappreciated your abstract prior to this session. It's been very illuminating. I appreciate everything everybody said. My question, I have several, but I'll ask one. She knows better than that. Is connectivity with the buyer. You've all expressed deep emotions about what you bring into your art. Outside of the texture and the color and all of that, like you said, it has to come from within. It has to be very emotional. It's taken me years to get to this point. And I'm wondering about your connectivity with the buyers. Now, does the buyer come up to you and say, there was somebody who said, this is the depressing piece, this is an exhilarating piece, and did you feel like that was a depressing piece and that was an exhilarating piece? But do you feel like that the same feelings that you deeply, as you've expressed very articulately, put into your paintings are shared by individuals who buy those specific paintings with what they convey to you as to why they wanted to buy that particular piece?
Another beautifully asked question that I'm going to just par down for the Facebook crowd is about the connectivity. Do each of these artists feel that what they felt when creating the work of art, the buyer feels the same thing? Is there that connectivity?
I'll just tell one more quick story. I think I might have told this here in a talk over the years. One of my favorite kind of connective experiences at this show, I had a painting of a bistro in Philadelphia that this woman that had been born out that way had fallen in love with, and she had sort of retitled the painting City of My Heart, and finally got her husband on board, and I'm hanging the piece in their home up here in the north part of the valley. We're hanging it in a wine bar, and we're having a lovely bottle of wine and a chat, and toward the end of the evening, I said to the woman, just in passing, well, I think I'm a lot older than you. And she says, well, I don't know about that. And I said, oh yeah, what year are you born? She says, 1962. And I said, what day? She said, May 25th. Well, it turned out we're both born on the same day in history. So that tends to be like an unusual phenomenon in this exhibit, is that there's like these kind of rivers that run beneath the connective tissue of, we're pretty sure Susan's responsible for most of it, but yeah.
So Stuart was addressing the river. So I feel like the river is what artists often call flow. It exists eternally, and we basically try and step into the river when we're painting. And if you want a practical experience of that, remember when you drove 10 miles and you couldn't remember driving those 10 miles because you were on sort of an automatic pilot? That is flow. So we, professionally, we learn how to step into that river. And so in my idea, we're channeling the unconscious onto the page or into the sculpture, and we're creating art from this place where the art is flowing through us. For me, that's a sacred thing, and my idea is that the patron walks into this tent and falls in love with the piece that speaks to their heart, which is like a talisman or almost a necessity of the soul, food for the soul for that person. What you're haunted by, like if you go home and you can't stop thinking about that one painting or that one piece that you needed to come back for, it's because you really, really, really needed it. And so we, in a way, while making ourselves incredibly happy by doing this, are also being of service. There's this sort of idea that if all people were working in their true capacity and their calling, that we would be like bees and we would all be producing honey and eventually snowball into heaven. So I'm doing my part. I know everybody else in this tent is too, and I hope you guys love what we do.
And there's definitely the connection for sure.
Yeah, I definitely think that, I don't try to, when I create a piece, I don't really think too much about it afterwards because it's not meant for me. And I don't really try to describe my pieces as I may describe my technique and how I choose color, but that's for you to decide. And you know, some pieces, everybody has a different take on my art, and I think it's really fascinating, the stories that I hear from people when they describe. I let them describe my work. And that's how it should be. You know, I think that, you know, you're meant to create it, and then it's gonna connect with someone. It's kind of like, you know, when I was actually in my coursework for color psychology, you know, as a child, we all have memories, and we don't really think about this, but we have memories of color. Whether it's a negative association or a positive association. And we can have that with many, many things, but we just don't think about it. So many times, you may not like a painting because there's that color or line or something about it, that association. By the same token, you might love it because you have really, really fond memories of color. I remember a client of mine that she would not buy anything red. And I asked her one day, I said, why red? She goes, because my mom made me wear a red dress when I was like basically a bad girl to school. And so she has this association. So I think we all have these associations, we just don't think about it. And it gets triggered sometimes when we view art, and especially abstraction. And it triggers positive or negative. And it's funny because we had this long discussion, and I always try to kind of bring people out of their fear. So when I left a little piece of red sea glass on her shelf. And she called me right away. I'm going to keep that there.
So when I think about your question regarding connectivity and asking whether or not that we think that our clients are experiencing the same emotions that we're experiencing, and that's why the connection happens and that's why they purchase our work, I think everyone is a unique individual. We all have a different version of reality. We all have totally different experiences that shaped our lives. So I think that connectivity in that sense where the client is mirroring the artist and exactly how they think and how they feel is pretty rare. It can happen, and it's really cool when it does happen because it is rare. However, I think one of the most fascinating parts about it is when someone will come along and appreciate your work, but they have their own interpretation of it. And I love the authenticity that this show brings, where people just come in and they're totally honest and they say, I love this piece and I see this in it. And you can have 5 people walk into your studio, 20 people walk into your studio, and they all might see different things, but they all might like the piece. And so it's really just a connectivity within the positive emotion aspect rather than in the same viewpoint, I think.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Oh, and we've got like 7. I'm going to take this lovely lady right in the front.
Do you dream in color?
Do you dream in color?
And Spanish.
Do dreams influence any of your work? Yeah. All of it?
Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. Sometimes I'll have dreams that are just black and white. I don't know what the heck's going on, and I'll be like, okay, that was random. And, you know, it really just depends. Certain occasions, yes. Others, just one of those days where you're just having a random dream and you wake up and you think, that was weird, and just move on with your day. You never know.
Absolutely not for me. I remember my dreams, but I'm pretty, no, not at all.
Okay. One more question, quick question, and then we'll wrap up. Carol. Is it hard for you to let go and sell a piece when it... No. The answer to that question is always no. And I think, Kathleen, like you talked about it, once you're done, you know it's not for you. It will find, and I do believe that every piece of art is created for somebody who will find it at their own time.
Although I do try to keep, like if I do a series of paintings, I do try to keep usually one piece of the series that I did. Just because it just represents kind of the growth that you've made, and also, you know, you should save some of your pieces, but most of the time, yeah, it's pretty easy to let go because I feel like it's meant for somebody else.
I'd say it's actually a lot harder not to sell. But there is that feeling like almost like your offspring, the work that you do, and some of the pieces I do, I might wrestle with for 10 months or a couple of years at times, keep coming back, but you know, to have that opportunity to, and you know, most of our time as artists is spent alone in the studio. Like my wife says, when the UPS man comes to the house back home, that kind of makes my week. But so the thing about being here is, you know, so much of the interaction and camaraderie is so rich. But at the end of the day, when you know, people kind of complete the circle for us as artists, that sort of propel us forward with our work, and it's a connection that naturally we all cherish.
I'm far more in love with the process of making the work than I am attached to the object at the end. It really is for you guys. And I personally believe that art is first and foremost a business. If you're going to make a successful career out of art, it has to be a business first, and it's also got to be a passion, because there's an incredible amount of time, incredible amount of creativity that goes into it to create what we create. And that is all out of passion, absolutely. My favorite part of my work is the fact that I get to bring joy to the people that decide to purchase and enjoy my work. And so when I'm creating, I have such a passion for it, but then I have an even deeper passion about passing that on and giving it to someone who's really going to appreciate it.
Good, excellent. Yeah, and thank you all for being here and for our wonderful panel. There is a movement among the artists. We're going to change the starving artist chili to the successful artist chili, because we believe in success for all. So if you take some time Stuart is in the north tent, about second row from the back. Hannah is right where the opening is in that panel. Please go visit them. Gabriella's halfway down on the south tent, and Kathy's like the next street over. So please enjoy, and we look forward to seeing you next week again.